Hilary is my name. I led a quiet life as a committed doctor, with my husband Nicholas and our adorable 3-year-old twins, Joseph and Ryan. Although our life was never very glamorous, it was joyful and full of family love. Nevertheless, that joy was abruptly snatched away. That was the day our town was hit by a hurricane. I've sensed a problem in my relationship with my parents since I was a small child. While my father was rarely home due to his unrelenting job commitments, my mother constantly put her personal needs first and frequently neglected domestic duties. Despite our parents' seldom praise, Lindsay, my younger sister, and I frequently played together and helped one another. People would frequently sigh at me and say things like, "You're such a handful." My yearning for early independence was fostered by this lack of support from my family. I decided to become a doctor in order to serve people and to develop the fortitude to live independently. It was during my college years that I met Nicholas, who was also on a path to a medical career. Drawn to his serious yet compassionate demeanor, our relationship naturally deepened over time. Despite the affection and connection that blossomed between us, my parents remained unimpressed by Nicholas, often questioning his sincerity with a skeptical, "He acts nice, but can you really trust him?" My mother would mutter in suspicion. But to me, he was irreplaceable. Our commitment eventually led to marriage and the joyous blessing of twins, which made me feel as though I had truly found my place in the world. However, this sense of belonging and happiness was fleeting. One day, the news soon reported that a hurricane was ominously approaching our town, prompting us to hurriedly pack essential items and seek refuge in our basement. The wind howled and the sound of breaking glass echoed. The twins, gripped by fear, clung to me, while Nicholas reassured us, holding my hand and whispering, "It'll be okay." After the hurricane passed and dawn broke, we pushed against the basement door, blocked by debris from outside. We exerted our strength several times before finally creating a gap to squeeze through. Before us lay a landscape of collapsed buildings, twisted steel beams, and mud-covered furniture scattered haphazardly. The roads were cracked, and utility poles had fallen, erasing any trace of what used to be. It wasn't just our home that was destroyed, the entire region shared this fate. Everywhere we looked, the destruction was evident, with the remnants of homes and debris scattered as far as the eye could see and faint cries for help echoing in the distance. It didn't take long to realize that everything was lost, yet we couldn't just stand by. As medical professionals, Nicholas and I needed to work in the disaster area. However, the safety of our twins was paramount, and we could not leave them in such chaos. I reached out to my parents for help. "Mom, it's me. What's up?" All of a sudden, her response was as indifferent as ever. "A hurricane hit, our home is gone, and the whole town is in a terrible state." "Oh dear, that sounds tough, but you all are safe, right?" Her words felt detached, as if it was someone else's problem. "Yes, but I have a favor to ask. Could you take care of Joseph and Ryan for a while? Nicholas and I need to work here." On the other end, I heard my mother sigh. "It's difficult when you ask so suddenly. We have plans to go to Japan, and taking care of 3-year-old twins is too much of a burden." Her words cut deep into my heart. Holding back tears, I managed to say, "I understand," and ended the call, feeling abandoned in our hour of need. In my moment of despair, I received a call from Nicholas's parents. They had heard about the devastating damage in our area through the news and were concerned. After explaining our situation, they immediately understood and willingly agreed to take care of the twins. "It must have been hard. Don't worry about Joseph and Ryan, we'll arrange for them to come here right away." Their words slightly eased the tension I felt. I can't express how much relief they brought me. Though I felt sad being let down by my parents, the warmth from Nicholas's family enveloped my heart. With the twins now safe with his parents, Nicholas and I were able to dedicate ourselves fully to the medical needs of the disaster-struck community. After the hurricane passed, and I stood amidst the devastated landscape, I felt as if my entire life had been trapped within the storm. Our home was completely destroyed, and while taking shelter in a refuge, we desperately provided medical support. Thanks to entrusting the twins to his parents, I could focus on my work with a sense of security. However, beneath that security lay a profound disappointment in my parents. Why did they refuse to support me, instead saying they were going to Japan and that taking care of the twins was too much of a burden. Their words pierced my heart deeply, and their indifference and cold attitude pushed me further to the edge. Gradually, that disappointment turned into anger, and each time I reflected on their actions, a great anger swelled within me. I had financially supported my parents out of a sense of duty rather than affection. They were people who loved luxury. My father once held a managerial position in a medium-sized company, and his income wasn't bad. However, my mother's spending habits strained our finances. New branded bags, high-end restaurants, overseas trips, these were essentials for living a life true to herself. My father didn't complain, simply continuing to work in silence. However, our lives drastically changed after he took early retirement. Our savings quickly depleted, and despite this, my mother continued her extravagant spending unabated. From a young age, my parents consistently told me I was a disappointment, yet I never lost the desire to be loved. That's why, even after becoming independent through my medical career, I continued to send them $1,000 every month. "You owe your success to us, don't you?" my mother would say, taking the money as if it were her due. Honestly, it was a burden, but I couldn't let go of the faint hope that perhaps sending money might make them love me. I reached out to them for help. All I asked was for them to look after the twins, yet what I received in return were cold words. At that moment, emotions I had suppressed for years surged forth. I had been sending them money for years and was always ready to help whenever they needed. Yet, when I truly needed them, they offered no help at all. What had I been sending them money for all this time? That night, I cried into Nicholas's chest. He didn't say a word, just gently rubbed my back, and that kindness made me cry even more. Over a month, as we continued our work as medical professionals in the disaster zone, the situation gradually began to stabilize. A consistent support system was established, and as shelter and medical facility management improved, the necessity for emergency response diminished. The stabilization of supply chains and medical systems meant that our work at the scene increasingly shifted towards routine. Despite many remaining challenges, it was becoming palpable that the situation was slowly improving. Weeks later, I found myself thinking of my parents and peeked at my mother's social media account. There, I saw cheerful photos from their trip to Japan. Seeing my mother smiling as she ate sushi and walked around Osaka in a kimono made something inside me snap. These people don't care about my suffering at all. And then I made a decision. I would stop supporting my parents. I needed to focus on protecting my own family. I contacted the bank and stopped the automatic transfers to my parents. At that moment, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. What followed was incessant contact from my parents. "What's the meaning of this? The money hasn't been transferred. Has it? What about this month's support? Are you abandoning us?" I didn't respond to any of it. Hearing their voices would reopen my emotional wounds. But Nicholas wasn't my only ally. There was also my sister, Lindsay. She had reached out after hearing about the hurricane. "Hillary, are you okay? I heard you're working in the disaster area with Nicholas and was worried. If there's anything I can do to help, just tell me." I expressed my gratitude to Lindsay from the bottom of my heart. "Lindsay, thank you so much for worrying. Nicholas and I are doing well, and the situation here is stabilizing a bit. The twins are being looked after at Nicholas's parents' house, so they're fine." As I touched upon Lindsay's kindness, I naturally began to speak. "But I'm really disappointed in our parents. When I asked them to take care of the twins, they said, 'We're going on a trip to Japan, and taking care of the twins is too much of a burden.' I was so frustrated, I stopped the support payments to our parents." Lindsay listened in silence for a while, but after I finished, she immediately responded, "Hillary, that must have been hard. Our parents have always been indifferent to us, and to act like that after all the support you've given is really disappointing. But what you've done for them up till now, I think that's amazing. They should appreciate it." Lindsay's words eased my mind a bit. Her understanding and encouragement felt like they lightened my emotional burden as I navigated life with the support of the people I met in the disaster area, Nicholas's family and Lindsay. I gradually began to reclaim our routine. We moved from the shelter to temporary housing and started a new life. The twins were laughing and healthy. Lindsay hesitated but answered, "Same as always, but they seem to be struggling a bit since your support stopped. Recently, they've been complaining about not having enough money and wondering why you suddenly stopped helping. Aunt mentioned that they've been airing these grievances. They're still posting photos of their travels on their social media accounts, but apparently, they're quite vocal about their complaints behind the scenes. They haven't contacted me, though." Hearing this, I felt conflicted. Then Lindsay quietly continued, "Let them be, Hilary. If you're happy now, that's what matters most." I sighed and confessed, honestly, I'm still trying to sort out my feelings. They are our parents, after all, but this was the right decision, wasn't it? "Of course," Lindsay replied emphatically. "You've always worked hard, Hilary. It's time to prioritize your happiness." Her words felt like salvation. I had allies. There were Lindsay, Nicholas, and the people from our new community. I wasn't alone. Since then, I've been participating in volunteer activities in the community and continued providing medical support at shelters. I distributed relief supplies with Patty and helped Thomas with disaster preparedness training. Through this, I realized how fulfilling it is to be needed and appreciated. The desire to be acknowledged by my parents no longer existed within me. I had a loving family and supportive friends. That was enough. One evening, while watching Joseph and Ryan play in the garden, a video called Lindsay. "Hilary, your expression seems softer lately." At Lindsay's comment, I couldn't help but smile. Really? Maybe I've finally forgiven myself. Lindsay smiled back from the other side of the screen. "You're strong, Hilary. I've always been on your side." With her words in my heart, I beamed a genuine smile. I no longer needed to be bound by the past. From then on, I was going to live my own life. After all, I wasn't alone anymore. Life in the new town was gradually healing my heart. One day, I received a call from the bank. "Is this Hilary Anderson? I need to confirm something with you." "Yes, what is it?" "There has been an application for a new credit card under your name recently. Do you know anything about this?" Paused, breathless. I hadn't made such an application. Could it be? "No, I have no idea about this. Can you stop the application?" "Certainly, I'll go ahead and put a credit freeze on your account for safety." After hanging up, I trembled as I called Nicholas. "Nicholas, this is serious. The bank just told me someone tried to open a credit card in my name. I think it might be my parents." Nicholas was silent for a moment before responding in a low voice. "I can't believe they would go that far. Maybe you should consider legal action." I nodded deeply. There was no more hesitation. I was ready to stand up to protect myself and my family. The next day, accompanied by Lindsay, I visited a lawyer named Wesley Harrison. He was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, and he listened attentively to my story. "I see. If there has been a credit card application made under your name, this is clearly a case of identity fraud. Considering the past financial support you've provided, it is also possible to claim damages." I was surprised by Wesley's words. The idea of claiming damages had never crossed my mind. But is it really okay to go that far? Wesley smiled kindly. "Hilary, what your parents have done constitutes financial exploitation. You haven't done anything wrong." Lindsay squeezed my hand. "Hilary, stop blaming yourself. I've watched you suffer for a long time now. It's time to protect yourself." Encouraged by her words, I made up my mind. Please proceed with legal action against my parents. Several weeks later, I was standing in court. My parents, through their lawyer, had repeatedly offered settlements, but I refused. I felt that if I forgave their actions, the same thing would happen again. During the trial, Wesley explained the situation calmly and accurately on my behalf. The plaintiff, despite being a victim of a disaster and living under difficult conditions, continued to provide medical support in the affected area. During this time, the defendants, her parents, used her name without permission to apply for a credit card. Additionally, they have been receiving financial support from the plaintiff for many years, which clearly constitutes financial exploitation. My parents had nothing to say in response. They just looked down, glaring at me resentfully. I faced their gaze squarely. There was no need to be afraid anymore. The judgment was in my favor. My parents were ordered to pay damages, and a restraining order was issued. At that moment, I finally felt a deep sense of relief. After the trial, Lindsay and I stopped by a cafe, holding a warm cup of coffee. I quietly muttered, "So it's really over now." Lindsay smiled gently. "Yes, Hilary, you did well." Holding the cup tightly, I closed my eyes. The pain, anger, and sadness I had carried were slowly being released from my heart. I was no longer bound by my parents. From now on, I would carve out my own life. Looking outside, the clear blue sky stretched out as if blessing the start of my new life. I took a deep breath and started walking forward. With the trial over, I had finally achieved peace of mind. The court's orders for my parents to pay damages and the restraining order were not just legal victories for me. They were proof that I had protected myself and moved on from the past. Several weeks later, Lindsay called me. "Hilary, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" Lindsay hesitated for a moment before starting to speak, her voice mixed with a sigh. "It seems that our parents have started family therapy." I gasped. Our parents undergoing family therapy? I couldn't believe it. "What do you mean?" After the trial, it seems they were quite depressed, especially Mom, who feels like she's lost everything now that she can't live that luxurious life anymore. But Dad has started to change. He's reflecting on what happened during the trial and has started counseling. I was speechless. My father attending counseling? It was almost unheard of for him to express his emotions. And so they decided to start family therapy together. It all started when Dad said, "If we continue this way, everything will be destroyed." A mix of disbelief and slight relief filled my heart, yet I was not ready to let my guard down so easily. And then I asked cautiously, "What are they hoping for? Do they want forgiveness or something?" Lindsay shook her head. "No, I just wanted to let you know. The courage you showed by standing up for yourself has ultimately led to them changing." Hearing this, I felt a slight weight lift from my shoulders. A few days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The sender was my parents. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope, and there were words written in my mother's handwriting. "To Hilary, I don't know where to start, but first let me apologize. We relied too much on you and were always thinking of ourselves, which I deeply regret. After the trial, we felt like we had lost everything, but in reality, we had lost sight of what was truly important long ago. Now we are undergoing family therapy and confronting our mistakes. Your dad is slowly trying to change, and for the first time, I'm taking a hard look at myself. Please, we want to start over. Although what I did to hurt you can never be forgiven, from now on, I sincerely wish for your happiness. Sincerely, your Mom." I finished reading the letter and took a deep breath. The fact that my mother, who had always been so distant and cold, was admitting her mistakes and apologizing was unexpected. However, my heart didn't immediately lighten. The wounds from the past aren't so easily healed. That night, I showed the letter to Nicholas. After reading it silently, he gently held my hand. "Hilary, whatever you decide, I'm with you," he said. Wrapped in his warmth, I spent a long time thinking. The next day, I called Lindsay. "Lindsay, I've read the letter." "What did you think?" she asked. "I'm not ready to forgive them just yet, but I won't let them control me anymore. I'm going to live my own life." Lindsay appeared to nod silently in agreement. "That's good, indeed. Your happiness is the most crucial factor." I later wrote my folks a reply. I didn't say I was forgiving of them. I just said, I'm going to keep living my life. My parents should take care of it if they are attempting to change. The past no longer holds me back. The next days were quiet. I laughed with Thomas and Patty, and I became closer to Lindsay than before. Every day the twins became a bit bigger, and Nicholas and I grew closer. I once gazed up at the sky while I watched the twins play in the garden. The pristine blue expanse was gently traversed by a lone cloud. My heart and the burden of the past were slowly becoming lighter. I'm not unsure anymore. I'll keep going down my own road since I know how valuable I am. The storm is over. I am at last. Jocelyn is my name. I work at an advertising business a little ways from the bustle of the city, and I am presently 28 years old. I have always worked hard since I was a small child, paving my own way on my own. On the other hand, our mother saw my younger sister, Alexandra, as the golden child. Our mother lavished Alexandra with affection and forgiven everything she did. The disparity in how we were handled has frequently upset me. She's just a child, they said dismissively when Alexandra acted selfishly, and I received a reprimand along the lines of "Be patient, you're the older sister." I gradually came to feel as though I had lost my position in our family and had to learn to put up with things quietly. The death of our father caused a permanent breach in our relationship. The more our mother loved Alexandra, the more she became dependent on her. To help with our family's finances, I left college in the interim, and I progressively drifted away from the family. When I wasn't there, Alexandra and my mother would laugh together, and I was treated like nothing. I ultimately made the decision to move out when I reached 25, even though I was back home. I had yearned to go away from the family's discord and loneliness. I was determined to make a name for myself in the outside world since I couldn't find a place at home. I eventually began living alone after saving money. I established a new life base close to the business, which is accessible by foot. Since leaving home, I naturally distanced myself from my mother and sister. Initially, it was to heal the dissatisfaction and frustration I had held inside. Gradually, my relationship with Alexandra began to change, and the tense atmosphere seemed slightly alleviated when I visited home. However, remnants of resentment still lingered in my heart. Then, last Thanksgiving Day, I met with my mother and Alexandra after a long time. My mother served us warm dishes, and Alexandra, true to her nature, was all smiles. However, what surprised me that day was suddenly hearing from Alexandra about her upcoming marriage. "Actually, I'm getting married next week," Alexandra said, looking embarrassed. My mother simply smiled without saying a word. A mix of emotions crossed my mind. The invitation, just a week in advance, brought both surprise and bewilderment. But at the same time, there was a faint sense of relief deep inside. I still feel, somewhere, that my mother's love was unfair. Watching my mother's joyous reaction to Alexandra's marriage, I was once again reminded of the unchanged weight of that love. My mother continued to be overprotective towards Alexandra, and I felt somewhat adrift in the midst of that. I asked Alexandra, "Why didn't you tell me about the marriage sooner? We're family." My words overflowed, and I inadvertently raised my voice. Alexandra looked surprised, hesitating a bit before responding. "Sorry, Jocelyn, but you seemed busy since you moved out, and it was hard to tell you. I didn't want to burden you." Her excuse made me feel a tightening in my chest. "So why didn't you tell me sooner? Why all of a sudden, a wedding next week?" I continued, feeling angry. Alexandra was at a loss for words and looked down. Then my mother, looking at Alexandra, gently smiled and said, "Jocelyn, try to understand what Alexandra was feeling. You haven't been home or in touch, so there wasn't a good time to tell you. It couldn't be helped." My mother's words sounded like they were shielding Alexandra. I was left speechless on the spot. Standing between my mother and Alexandra, I couldn't shake the feeling of being excluded. No matter how hard I tried, was I always just an outsider, looking in? Unable to accept that, I quietly left the scene. The night I learned the wedding was next week, I spent it with complex emotions. While I had feelings of celebrating Alexandra's happiness, there was also a whirl of unease and conflict within me. No tears came, but I felt something welling up inside. It was the wall of emotions I had built over the years, never truly cherished within the family. I felt sad, poignant, and unbearably lonely. As the wedding day approached, I felt the need to sort out my feelings. I wanted to celebrate Alexandra's marriage, but at the same time, I had to reassess my place within the family. Could I ever feel the happiness my mother and Alexandra do? Or am I doomed to remain isolated within the family forever? Gradually, I felt a strong desire not to attend the wedding. On the wedding day, I entered the venue feeling as if I had been left behind in a distant past. The hall, adorned in elegance, was enveloped in the soft light of chandeliers, filled with the smiling faces and cheerful voices of guests. After adjusting the hem of my dress, I took a deep breath and approached the reception. I received the seating chart, but my name was nowhere to be found. Feeling as though my presence was not even allowed, a sense of unrest stirred within me. Confused, I inadvertently asked a nearby staff member, who looked a bit surprised and then guided me, saying, "Your seat is over here." As I took my seat at the very edge of the venue, in a corner as if hidden from everyone's notice, I was struck by the placement and overwhelmed by indescribable emotions. Moreover, the edge of the place card was slightly bent, clearly treated carelessly. The moment I picked up the card with trembling fingers, my heart froze. I blinked several times, rechecking the words, but there it was unmistakably written. My fingers trembled, and my knees felt like they could give way at any moment. A shock, as if my very existence was being denied, coursed through my body. "What is this?" My murmured voice was hoarse, reaching no one. However, at that moment, I heard footsteps creeping up from behind. When I turned around, there stood Alexandra in her wedding dress, looking as if she were a scene from a movie, beautiful, yet her smile was as cold as ice. "Do you like it?" Her voice carried a hint of malice. I gasped, clutching the card as I stared at her. "What does this mean?" Alexandra snorted through her nose. "It means exactly what it says. You're not really part of our family. I thought being a waitress suits you." My mind went blank. I opened my mouth to retort, but no sound came out. Then, feeling someone's gaze, I looked to the side and saw my mother standing there. She didn't even glance at me but instead smiled kindly at Alexandra. "You truly look wonderful, Alexandra. Your mother is so proud to see you like this." She acted as if I didn't exist. At that moment, everything clicked. My mother knew about this insult. She even seemed to be enjoying it. The loneliness and alienation I had endured for years surged from the depths of my heart. "What do you mean I'm not family?" I finally managed to choke out the words, but my mother just gave me a cold glance and said nothing. Instead, Alexandra shrugged and answered, "Well, you've always been different from us, haven't you? Besides, after Dad died, you were hardly home and moved out after a while. It's troubling if you act like family now." After my father's death, I had worked relentlessly to support the family. My reduced time at home wasn't due to dwindling love but to protect them. Yet, why must I endure such treatment? I bit my lip in frustration but didn't let the tears flow. Showing tears would mean I played right into their hands. I gripped the card, taking a quiet breath. Cold anger began to rise from the depths of my heart. "I see. I understand now." Leaving those words behind, I turned my back. I could hear Alexandra giggling behind me, but it no longer mattered. I wasn't going to let them defeat me. I couldn't be trampled on any longer. I moved to a corner of the venue and pulled out my smartphone. On it was a file that served as evidence of my revenge against Alexandra. In fact, Mandy, my colleague and a friend of Alexandra's, had informed me 3 months ago that Alexandra was getting married. However, I received no communication about it. Feeling indignation, I had resolved to retaliate against Alexandra. I began to subtly probe around Alexandra's circle. It started with mere gossip, but gradually more surprising information came to light. There were whispers among friends that Alexandra had been seen getting cozy with a man other than her fiancé. At first, it was hard to believe, but then Mandy informed me about it directly. Actually, the story she started telling me was beyond my imagination. Despite being engaged, Alexandra had been having secret meetings with another man. What was even more shocking was learning from Mandy that Alexandra had been stealing money from our mother. Mandy once overheard Alexandra saying, "Mom's money is like my money. I can use what's in her account freely." When Mandy questioned, "Is that really okay?" Alexandra dismissed it with, "It's fine, we're family." The evidence I had gathered with Mandy's help was crammed into that small device. When I heard about the wedding a week ago, I acted as if it was the first I'd heard of it and quietly left the house. But inside, I had already decided what I needed to do. I took a deep breath, calming my heart. I couldn't be swayed by emotions here. I would calmly and surely rectify this humiliation. As the reception began and the guests chatted merrily, a heavy, indescribable weight. Afterward, I was away on a business trip for a few days. When I returned, the front door was ajar. Feeling my heart pound like a drum, I cautiously stepped inside the house. The room was terribly ransacked. Items from the shelves were scattered on the floor, picture frames were broken, and a painting I cherished was also shattered on the floor. I immediately called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I carefully assessed the situation without moving anything. Then, among the shards of a broken vase scattered on the living room floor, I noticed a small silver charm that stood out. It was part of a bracelet that Alexandra always wore. And when I picked up the charm, my chest fluttered with anxiety. I wondered if this might indicate something, but I still had no proof. Eventually, the police arrived, and I explained the situation in the room. After a thorough inspection, the police began to review the surveillance camera footage. Watching the footage with them, Alexandra's figure was clearly captured entering my house late at night. Seeing this, my heart turned cold. The footage served as evidence, and the police began to act on the assumption that Alexandra was the perpetrator. While the police proceeded with their formalities, I consulted with a lawyer named George about the legal steps to take next. After reviewing the surveillance footage, he quietly said, "This is a clear case of illegal entry. If we find evidence of theft, legal action can be taken." I was resolved. I would not forgive Alexandra. She had not only insulted me but also committed a crime. Days later, George and I went to the police station and formally filed a complaint. My anger gradually turned into a calm determination, and I quietly awaited the day to deliver justice to Alexandra. The day the summons arrived, Alexandra stormed into my workplace. The sound of her heels echoed in the quiet office, and everyone's eyes turned toward us. With an angry expression, Alexandra stared at me and raised her voice. "Jocelyn, what have you done?" Her voice was trembling, but it was laced with definitive anger. I stood up from my desk and answered calmly, "What have I done? I simply sought justice." Alexandra paused for a moment, then her emotions exploded. "Justice. It all started because you ruined my wedding." To that, I replied calmly, yet with conviction, "Ruined your wedding? That was your own doing." Alexandra appeared shocked for a moment, but soon her face turned red as she attempted to retort, but I cut her off and continued, "What you did was a crime. Not only did you steal our mother's money, but you also broke into my room and ransacked it. The evidence has already been submitted to the police. Now it's up to the court to decide." She collapsed to her knees. I quietly returned to my seat and resumed my work. Weeks later, the day of the trial arrived. I stood at the witness stand and presented the surveillance footage. As the image of Alexandra breaking into my room was displayed on the courtroom screen, the gallery murmured. The verdict was guilty. Alexandra received a suspended sentence and was ordered to pay damages to me. After the trial, Alexandra turned to me, her anger seeping through her condemnation. "Why did you do this? Are you satisfied after suing your family like this?" Her attitude suggested she saw herself as the victim, which left me speechless. Alexandra never acknowledged her mistakes to the end and left with a resentful glare. I watched her leave and sighed deeply. Then I quietly exited the courtroom. After the trial, I felt the tension that had been stretched tight within me finally begin to relax. Legal sanctions had been imposed on Alexandra. Justice had been served, and a new chapter in my life was about to begin. About a week after the trial, I received a call from my mother. "Jocelyn, I've decided to sue Alexandra to recover the money she stole from me. She is no longer my daughter. You are my only child." I was taken aback by her words. It was the first time I had heard my mother speak critically of Alexandra. No matter how much trouble Alexandra caused in the past, my mother had never blamed her and always defended her. "Do what you think is best, Mom." I could hear her catch her breath on the other end of the phone, but she quickly suggested in a lighter tone, "Once I get the money back, let's go on a trip together." I tightened my grip on the receiver. "Mom, that's not right, is it?" I said quietly. There was a long silence before my mother asked in a puzzled voice, "What? What's wrong?" I took a deep breath and chose my words as calmly as possible. The fact that Alexandra did what she did is her own responsibility, of course. But don't you share the blame too? You've always pampered her, letting her believe that she could do anything and still be forgiven. I sensed my mother was about to say something, but I continued. Getting your money back might be important, but that alone won't change anything. I could hear her breathing over the phone. She probably understood what I was trying to say. I know I've been too indulgent with Alexandra. I realized that I've been terrible to you too. I remained silent, not responding to her words. It felt like the impact of my mother's role in the strained relationship between Alexandra and me had only now become clear. But even though I had sought justice against Alexandra, I hadn't yet come to terms with my feelings towards my mother. I've corrected justice against Alexandra, but that doesn't mean I've forgiven you. I'm not generous enough to forgive how you've treated me so quickly. I'm going to live on my own now, and you should too. With those final words, I hung up the phone. Subsequently, emails from my mother arrived daily, expressing regret and a desire to make amends. The emails were filled with words of remorse like, "I'm sorry, please give me just one more chance, and I deeply regret hurting you." I couldn't tell if my mother was genuinely remorseful or truly wanted me back. However, the accumulated past events meant that her words did not resonate with me. I never replied to her, simply continuing to ignore her communications quietly. Eventually, I blocked her contact information. It felt too late for her to understand the pain I had felt. Then, a new life awaited me. Determined not to be bound by past relationships, I resolved to move forward. At work, my colleagues supported me. During lunch, many commented, "You did nothing wrong, and it's good that justice prevailed." Their support was incredibly uplifting. Fueled by their encouragement, I dedicated myself to my work and gradually regained my routine. One day, I received a letter. The sender was Alexandra. To Jocelyn, "I have lost everything. I now regret trying to take revenge on you. But it's too late, isn't it? Mom has abandoned me too. I am beyond forgiveness. I hope you find happiness. That's the least I can do to make amends." Alexandra. After reading the letter, I was nearly overwhelmed by complex emotions. Should I accept her apology, or should I just cut off the past and move forward? The answer was not easy to find. Months later, I was at a party celebrating the success of a new project. Holding a glass, I surveyed the venue and spotted a familiar back approaching. I realized it was Alexandra, who was working as a waitress at the party venue. She looked utterly exhausted, a far cry from her former glamorous self. Her complexion was poor, and fatigue was evident around her eyes. She desperately smiled while serving drinks to guests, but her smile carried a hint of emptiness. I watched her for a while, and our eyes met several times as she moved busily around. Alexandra looked surprised for a moment but quickly averted her gaze and continued her work. A strange feeling welled up in my chest. Then Mandy approached me. "It seems Alexandra broke off her engagement with Kevin," she informed me. Mandy started speaking quietly, a look of concern apparent on her face. I couldn't respond to her immediately. She then continued, "Since the trial, Alexandra seems to have been struggling with debt. Additionally, Kevin has demanded alimony from her, and it seems like she's really cornered. She even asked me for a loan. It looks like she's juggling several jobs besides this one." Hearing about Alexandra struggling to repay debts and working desperately evoked complex feelings in me. However, this was all the retribution she deserved. What she had done should not be forgiven. I glanced at Alexandra momentarily. The irony of her working as a waitress now, after she had mockingly called me one at the wedding, was not lost on me. It must be painfully clear to her now how much she has hurt and betrayed others. I hoped that Alexandra would think back on her previous behavior and lead a more moral life going forward while I was still speaking with Mandy. My mother was mentally besieged, I also found out. She was confined up and had not left the house at all, according to a relative. I didn't feel sorry for her when I heard that her family was worried about her. My mother's predicament and Alexandra's treachery were both the result of their own deeds, and I think my mother ought to acknowledge that. In my opinion, my mother must face her difficulties alone, If she is unable to alleviate her own pain, then that is also her issue. It now seems too hard to make amends with my family. I should choose a path where I can